Whose revolution is it? And I think that's a very good question, one that we haven't asked. And, you know, I've heard actually over the course of the weekend the phrase Royal Commission made a few times as part of a public policy process that many of us here are familiar with when it comes to really substantive issues. Why haven't we had a Royal Commission on the internet? I mean, this thing is impacting every aspect of society, and we all kind of pretend we know what's going on. And I'll be the first to the room to say I have no clue. And in fact, it's that position of humility that has allowed me to learn what I have, because I start from the assumption that I don't totally know what's going on. But we live in an economic-centric world, and I would be negligent to not say that the scarce resource in our world is shared reality. That it's very rare that we have the privilege we've had this weekend to have the type of shared conversations, So the first answer I'll give, I'm kind of skeptical as to whether conversation and discourse happens online.
I suspected this.
And social media is often referred to as conversational media. But it's only if you agree. It's only if you drink the Kool-Aid can you be accommodated. So this notion of 2.0, obviously we need to talk about 1.0 before we get to 2.0. And Revolution 1.0 in the context of the internet was the web. Of course, the internet's been around since the 60s, you know, heydays in the 70s and 80s. But it was in the early 90s that the web, one of the most dominant protocols of the web, made it accessible so that everybody could use this internet thing. Everyone could communicate on this internet thing. But the 1.0 was very static. It was a pamphlet as a website. Oh, I need a website. Okay, I got a pamphlet. I'll put it up. So 2.0, the second generation of the web, is interactive. It is what it is because it makes it real easy to publish. It makes it real easy to engage, to communicate. But that still really doesn't tell you anything about revolution. Now, as you may have inferred, I'm a bit of a bibliophile. I love books, I love reading, I love language, I love words. So I remember in the early 90s when I was getting this internet thing, I found a pamphlet by IBM called The Information Revolution. And it was a fascinating pamphlet I used to carry around to my radical friends and look at them and go, look, IBM's an ally. They're with us fighting the revolution. And because, you know, I would look in the dictionary and I would see the definition of revolution is the overthrow of government. And I'd start asking myself, what is this revolution? Is it a revolution? But I wanted to, as a framework, to contextualize it into North America. Because we often think that the revolution's over there. It's in Egypt, it's in London, it's in Madison, Wisconsin. But it's not necessarily in Canada. But there's actually currently going on a hacker dissident movement around the world that is incredibly populated by Canadians. The 416-905, the Toronto area, has always had the highest density of hackers anywhere in the world. Partly for reasons of education, reasons of affluence, reasons of telecommunications infrastructure. What is it about these tools? Like, is there a changing relationship between traditional political authority and is there a slacktivism or a distraction to all of this? Yes and no. Yes and no. What is substantial, what is real, what makes power quake in their boots is amplification. That anything, anywhere in the world, at one point, started way back in the day with Rodney King, but it was January 25th in Egypt, can be amplified so that everyone hears it. Which makes it very difficult for illegitimate authority to commit injustice. Unless no one amplifies. Or unless no one hears that amplification. And sadly here in Canada, while it's easy for us to look elsewhere about how the world is changing, we tend to close our eyes when it comes to the change that happens in this country.
We were the last community that said yes to TV because the reason why we said no to television at that time was because there was no Inuktitut language spoken on television at that time. And we said until such time there's Inuktitut speaking programs on television, will we accept it?
And for me, you know, one of the best things about the revolutions, be it in Tunisia, in Egypt, Yemen, Bahrain, Syria, everywhere, is that they took that eye of the internet and made it the eye of the person. And they also, by doing that, they destroyed a whole bunch of awful stereotypes that really did create an us and them. And one of the worst was that we, of that part of the world over there, were all about tribes and groups and families, and we didn't care about the individual. And you, the people over there, were all about these selfish beings, and you didn't care about families, but you just cared about yourselves, and you were becoming more and more atomized as I, and we were becoming more and more drowning in our tribes, and all of that was just bullshit, because we're human beings at the end of the day, and it did a disservice to you, and it did a disservice to us. And so one of my favorite rewards of the revolution was that it showed you that we all were eyes, and the internet was the bridge basically that allowed you to cross over into my eye. Because we have a labor movement in Egypt that was again traditionally crushed, brutally crushed by the Mubarak regime. Basically, I mean, divide and conquer. They perfected it because we had all these eyes, but it made sure that these eyes, capital I, did not see each other. So the labor movement, whenever they rushed, or whenever they moved to organize, they would immediately, in the 90s, send security forces. I mean, we've had waves and waves, this is again not new, to crush any protests. But over the past 7 or 8 years, the labor movement has really come into its own, unprecedented numbers of strikes. And what the Mubarak regime would do was they would swoop in and give them the minimum of their demands, because their nightmare scenario was that the labor movement would connect with all the other eyes. And they would all recognize that they have one enemy, and that enemy is the Mubarak regime. And they recognized that one enemy when they all marched on January the 25th, because online they found each other. Because online you could go on there and you could say, I count. For decades, the Mubarak regime told me I didn't count, but I count, and I have a voice. And you could go on there and write whatever you want. You had the slacktivists. You had the guys who clicked like to the invitation to demonstrate on January the 25th. But it's about more than clicking like. You've actually got to go out there and do it. So you had slacktivists, but you know, even the slacktivists were being affected, because even if you're a slacktivist and you see Khalid Said's shattered face, your slacktivism is going to catch up with you. Because if you don't go out there and do something about it, that shattered face could be yours.